So you may have heard of Alcatraz as the rock, but Florida actually has its own rock, and it's pretty much as similarly secure as Alcatraz, with a similar reputation for violence and misery. The state legislature established Raiford State Penitentiary in 1913, and the rock was built 14 years later on Raiford's grounds. It was always a rough prison, even from the early days when it was actually segregated between black and white, just as all the southern states were in those days, and there was a lot of abuse. However, in January 1919, Captain J.S. Blitch was appointed warden and attempted to bring about positive change to the facility. The inmates were rewarded for their labours in the field with theatrical productions and weekly baseball games. However, continued reports of guards beating inmates soured the positive image that Blitch was trying to publicise. But in 1927, a license tag factory was constructed, adding to the already extensive production line of the prison. The main housing unit, known as the Rock, was erected in 1928, a major step in the process of increasing the prison population. This building was kept in use until the court order in 1985. So the Rock actually remained at the prison until 1999, when that demolition occurred. By 1932, the inmate population was over 2,000, and a mess hall, auditorium and library had been added. The expanding prison also added a laundry and shirt factory around this time. Shortly after, in 1935, a maximum security building was constructed called the Flat Top. This proved vital in the expansion of the centre, as from this stage forward the prison would remain a maximum security facility. This was also the year of the West Unit was built to house female offenders, which remained in use until 1954. The East Unit became a separate institution in July 1972, renamed Florida State Prison. The original prison site became known as Union Correctional Institution. So Florida State Prison is the prison there that is more or less on the same site that still exists today. There are a lot of black prisoners throughout the history of the Rock, and there is a lot of report of racial tension and the guards that were largely white abusing black prisoners, and this actually contributed to the whole place being shut down in 1999. So the Rock was already infamous for its hardened criminals, knifings, beatings and rapes when bank robber Ken Cooper first walked through its massive steel gates in 1983. "It was the valley of the shadow of death," said Cooper, who was held in the Rock for 2 years while serving a 99-year sentence for robbing a Jacksonville bank. "It was an evil place." Cooper continues, "It earned its name because it was a place that no one ever got out of." Indeed, the Rock had 18-inch thick concrete walls reinforced with steel railroad rails. And there was also a rumour that an old Model T Ford's foundation was thrown into the reinforced concrete. I guess, as Henry Ford once said, you can have any colour as long as it's black. In this case, colour don't matter, cause that old rust bucket gonna be inside the walls of the Rock. So Raiford eventually became the first Florida state prison, and in 1972 was renamed the Union Correctional Institution. Union sits on 76 acres and is ringed by 3 chain-link fences, the outer and inner fences standing 12 feet in height, the middle set at 14 feet and topped with electrical wiring. Between and atop the fences are rolls of razor wire. I mean, 18-inch reinforced concrete. Try digging your way out of that. I don't think it's going to happen. That certainly wouldn't have been a viable option. So the prisoner Cooper, who was there in the early 80s, continues, "It was demon controlled. We were doing to each other whatever we wanted to do. with large prison cells full of men and some of the worst people that Florida had to offer. There was a atmosphere of anarchy at this prison, and even guards weren't safe. So the guard Branham, as he says on a recent tour, he pointed to an area where a prisoner knifed him in the back in 1983, the same area where his best friend, Corrections Sergeant John Stephen Dennard, was fatally stabbed 2 weeks earlier. The 12-inch homemade knife hit his shoulder blade so hard that it bent before piercing his left lung. Having suffered this horrible injury, Branham was actually unarmed at the time and had to fight off the attacker with his bare hands, running to the prison hospital, wheezing for breath, and 2 unarmed officers were injured trying to protect him. In 2 months in 1983, 10 guards were knifed. They wanted to run up a score on us for a while, said Branham. Another officer, a Sergeant Thomas Baker, was also stabbed in the neck during this incident. So this place wasn't a place to work for the faint of heart, that's for sure. I mean, if you're in Florida at that time, I think stick to working at Busch Gardens or picking oranges, frankly. So the prison was shut down eventually due to very poor conditions. As we see today, even, there's a lot of prisoners living in poor conditions with fungus in the cells and filthy cells and water that is barely drinkable. So when it was actually demolished in 99, even that process didn't go very well. It says that the guard Branham says the ball was bouncing off and it actually took 3 or 4 hits before it actually broke through the first section of wall. So among the modern Florida State Prison inmates that are still on death row there, we have the likes of Glenn Rogers, who was the Casanova killer, who went across state lines killing lots of women, a very dangerous and terrible man. Wade Wilson, who was recently sentenced, is on Florida death row right here in the new prison and waiting execution. And then you have the likes of Gary Hilton as well, who is an infamous serial killer. And of the former inmates, I mean, you've got a who's who of bad guys, really. The likes of Ted Bundy, who was executed in '89, Bobby Joe Long, who was the cousin of Henry Lee Lucas, another serial killer, Gary Ray Bowles, another infamous serial killer, Danny Rolling, the Gainesville Ripper. So really the worst of the worst were on death row here. The electric chair at the Rock was rather, I suppose, amusingly called Old Sparky, and it's deemed in several judgments as being like a cruel and unusual punishment, as you might think an electric chair execution may go fairly smooth. Actually, this is probably not the case. Many men who were put to death at Old Sparky had appearingly very painful, prolonged executions, and it was summed up well by an attorney who, witnessing a botched execution, commented, "People who wish to commit murder better not do it in the state of Florida." Not exactly the most enjoyable selection a person would ever have to make, but you can still choose the electric chair as method of execution, although it was last used in Florida in 1999. Ever after all these kind of shocking incidents, lethal injection became preferred, and I believe even that now is largely being questioned. There certainly is no perfect science when it comes to these things. So that's the Rock in Raiford, now shut down. It was the land equivalent of Alcatraz with them 18-inch thick walls. Thanks for listening.